chapter 19, verse 30. Now Lot went up from Zoar with his 2 daughters, remember them? And stayed in the mountains because he was afraid to stay in Zoar. And he stayed in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. Then the firstborn daughter said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is not a man on the Eretz land to have relations with us according to the custom of all the Eretz, the land. Come, let's make our father drink wine, and let's sleep with him, so that we may keep our family alive through our father." So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and slept with her father, and he didn't know when she lay down or got up. And on the following day, the firstborn said to the younger, "Look, I slept last night with my father. Let's make him drink wine tonight too. Then you go in and sleep with him, so that we may keep our family alive through our father." So they had their father drink wine that night too. And the younger got up and slept with him. And he didn't know when she lay down or got up. And both of the daughters of Lot conceived by their father. The firstborn gave birth to a son and named him Moab. You know, he is the father of Moabites, to this day. As for the younger, she also gave birth to a son and named him Ben-Ami. He is the father of the sons of Ammon to this day. Now, Avraham journeyed from there toward the land of the Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur. And he lived for a time in Gerar. And Avraham said of his wife Sarah, "She's my sister." So Avimelech, king of Gerar, sent men and took Sarah. But God came to Avimelech in a dream of the night and said to him, "Behold, you're dead." Literally in Hebrew, behold, dead. Because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is married. Now Avimelech had not come near her. And he said, "Lord, will you kill a nation, even blameless? Did he himself not say to me, 'She's my sister,' and she herself said, 'He's my brother'? In the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands, I've done this." Then Elohim, God, said to him in the dream, "Yes, I know that in the integrity of your heart you have done this, and I also kept you from sinning against me. Therefore I did not let you touch her. Now then, return the man's wife, for he is a prophet. And he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return, know that you will certainly die, you and all who are yours." So Avimelech got up early in the morning and called all his servants and told all these things in their presence, and the people were greatly frightened. Then Avimelech called Avraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? And how have I sinned against you that you brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? You've done things to me that ought not to be done." And Avimelech said to Avraham, "What have you encountered that you have done this thing?" Avraham said, "Because I thought, surely there's no fear of Elohim in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she actually is my sister, the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And it came about when God caused me to wander from my father's house that I said to her, this is the kindness which you will show to me. Everywhere we go, say of me, he's my brother. Avimelech then took sheep and oxen and male and female servants and gave them to Avraham and returned his wife Sarah to him. Avimelech said, behold, my land's before you. Settle wherever you please. To Sarah, what? He's talking to the wife? To Sarah, he said, look, I have given your brother, 1,000 pieces of silver. It is your vindication before all who are with you, and before everyone you are cleared. Then Avraham prayed to God, and God healed Avimelech and his wife and his female slaves so that they gave birth. Oh, yeah, aside here. For the Lord had completely closed all the wombs of the household of Avimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. Then the Lord took note of, attended to, oversaw Sarah as he had said. And the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. So Sarah conceived and bore a son to Avraham in his old age. At the appointed time of which God had spoken to him. Avraham named his son who was born to him, the son whom Sarah bore to him, Yitzhak. Laughter, Yitzhak. Then Avraham circumcised his son Yitzhak when he was 8 days old, as God commanded him. Now Avraham was 100 years old when his son Yitzhak was born to him. Sarah said, God has made Sakak, same root word, Yitzhak, for me. Everyone who hears will Yitzhak with me. And she said, who would have said to Avraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have given birth to a son in his old age. Everybody okay? How come you don't read these stories in the children's Bibles? It's like baby's first Bible. These things aren't here. Okay, but it is in the Bible, and for good reason. Remember, some of these stories are just so disturbing. And remember, the biblical authors aren't required just because it happened to put them in, to write them down. The fact that they happened, lots of things happened that they did not write down that were probably even more awkward and weird. Of course, we know human history. It gets really awful. Why, especially Lot and his daughters, why that? Well, there are reasons other than the fact that it simply happened. Holy Spirit inspired the Moses writing team to actually put this in the narrative. I was going to say for a good reason, but for multiple good reasons, and so we're going to cover some of those today. Part of the reason is that the story of Lot and his daughters is kind of a resolution to the story of Lot and his daughters from last week. Remember what happened with Lot and his daughters last week and how he treated them? Okay, we're going to see this kind of retributive sort of justice come back on him. Also, if you recall, the big question here is how is the promised one to come about? In other words, how do we go about preserving and rescuing the line? This is a huge thing in the ancient Near East. It's huge today, but 1,000,000 times more huge then is how you live on is through the children that you have. And we're going to see 3 different ways of preserving or rescuing the line in these 3 stories, which is why I've kind of connected things that are in different chapters. Because remember, the chapters are amazing, they're great, but the chapter headings and differences were put in hundreds of years after Jesus. They didn't exist for the ancient Israelites. They just saw one continuous narrative. And these 3 stories are linked. So starting with verse 30. Lot went up from Zoar with his 2 daughters, stayed in the mountains because he was afraid to stay in Zoar. He He stayed in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. So when you see repetition like that, you know, wait, well, why is it repeating itself? That's a signal that there's a chiasm, which we're going to talk about. But I want you to just remember that last week we read how Lot begged and pleaded with the angelic visitors, the supernatural beings. Please let me stay in this little town that's about to be destroyed. It's so small, it's insignificant. I don't want to stay in the mountains. I want city life. And the angel's like, fine, we'll spare that one. There's that little town. And now we see he ends up in the mountains anyway because he's afraid of Zoar. The text doesn't say why he was afraid, but this is the center of the chiasm. Lot and his 2 daughters are the first and last parts, and then he stayed in the mountains, and which kind of corresponds to he stayed in a cave. And right in the center of that is the fact that he was afraid. He was afraid. So the central point is fear. And Lot, as we have seen, starting in chapter 13 really, his lifetime of doing what seems right in his own eyes, choosing what seems to him to be most advantageous, being willing to sacrifice other people to protect his own reputation, focus on himself and what he wants and what he needs. All of this has led to an existence dominated by fear. By fear. Self-focus, it converts into this life of being dominated by fear. And there's 2 kinds of fear in the scripture, same word, but 2 ideas on fear, 2 perspectives, and one of them is very good, and one of them is very bad. And we're going to see both of them in tonight's lesson. So he left the hill person life to become a sophisticated city person. The result is he becomes a caveman. He becomes a caveman. Habitual lack of trust in Yahweh and leaning on his own understanding has led to fear. And I think that that Solomon's collected Proverbs, and particularly chapter 3, verses 3 through 7, are, I'm sure, in part, a reflection of many stories in the Torah, but certainly this one as well. Verse 3, do not let kindness and truth, chesed and emet, leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. So what are we writing in the tablets of our heart? Kindness and truth. So Lot, he left kindness and truth way behind. He left Avram and the call so he could get the best, choicest land. He left kindness towards his daughters way behind. So they're not written on the tablet of his heart. Verse 4, you will find favor or grace and a good reputation in the sight of God and man, with kindness and truth. So Lot was all about reputation. He wanted reputation. That's why he was at the city gates of Sodom. That's why he was dwelling in Sodom. That's why, he was willing to sacrifice his daughters for the sake of his household guests, which is a big thing of honor in the ancient world. Reputation was everything to him. And now he has no standing at all. He's alone in a cave. So if you want to find favor and good reputation, it seems counterintuitive, but kindness and truth are the way to go. Verse 5, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. Obviously, he was trusting himself and his own understanding. Verse 6, in all your ways acknowledge him. Most of you know this verse. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will make your paths straight. Well, he's not acknowledging Yahweh in all his ways. So his path becomes crooked and it's leading to this cave. Verse 7, I think, is perhaps the most important verse in Proverbs 3, or one of them. And we leave it out on our Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, like memorization. Do not be wise in your own eyes. This is kind of what main theme in the story of Abraham, right? Is, am I going to do things the way I see it, or is there a different way to see it? Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord. That's the good fear. Turn away from evil. So Lot didn't fear Yahweh. Fear came on him. Lot did not turn from Ra, bad, And so Ra, or bad, is about to come upon him. Starting verse 31. The firstborn said to the younger, our father, he's old, and there's not a man on the land to have relations with us according to the custom of all the land. So here's the problem. There's not a man on the Eretz. Well, of course, if on the literal earth there are men living there. That's not what they're saying. But to Lot's daughters, they've gone off the grid. They're living in a cave. There's no social standing. If you're in a city or if you're in a community or a rural community, you have networks of associations with other people, and that's how you get married. It's not like, oh, I met somebody on the way down the hill to the water and we fell in love, and that's not how it worked. It was familial network of connections, which Lot has none at this point. So they're like, what are we gonna do? We're alone. And dad is old, meaning that he's too old to move somewhere new and reestablish new social contacts and enmesh himself in a different society so that there's a potential that we could marry somebody. Time is running out. So this is their solution. Their solution is to do what seems right in their own eyes. And if it reminds you of another story in the first few pages of Genesis, there's a reason for it. So, come, let us make our father drink wine. Let's sleep with him so that we may keep our family alive through our father. So the plan is not because they lust after their father. This is what we learn here. It's to preserve lineage, which is everything to a person. In the ancient Near East, a woman's descendant line, it's just as important to her as a man's reputation is to him. They're not after their father's affection, they're after his seed. They want kids, they want lineage, they want a future. That's what everybody's hopes and dreams are wrapped up into, and there's no way to get it living alone in a cave. So they're gonna make him drink wine, and then they're gonna sleep with him. So this is an intentional way of wording this to make you think back. This is extended echo effect, is one of the strategies of the biblical authors, back to Noah. Remember Noah, who after the flood, he started a vineyard, and in his case, nobody made him, but he drank a bunch of wine. A lot of arguments as to whether he knew it would be fermented, whatever. He drank a bunch of wine, he became drunk, and his nakedness was exposed to one of his children. Something sketchy is going on there. There was a power play by his son Ham to see, if you wish, his nakedness, and then use that as leverage with the other brothers. So this was a power play. Lot drinks fermented fruit. He's exposed to a power play by his daughters. It's the same idea, except it's double, because they make him drink the wine, and instead of one child pulling a power play, it's two. You see how it's an extended echo effect, but it's doubled down. So where did Lot's daughters even learn to treat a family member this way? It's her dad, for Pete's sake. And this is not being portrayed as Lot, he's a pervert kind of thing. He's out of the picture. He's unconscious. The idea is that the daughters are abusing their aged father. And where did they learn to abuse a family member where they should be showing honor and respect? From Lot. That's where they learned it, because he was willing to oppress them by offering them for gang rape last week in order to protect his reputation as a host. So Lot's daughters are willing to oppress their father with incest in order to protect their lineage. You see the mirror image that's going on there? It's awful, but it's there for us to see so that we can see the relationship to what Lot did to them, which should cause us to think and learn. And it's also a relationship to this pattern that keeps repeating about children pulling power plays on their parents. So verse 33, they go through with it. They made their father drink wine that night. The firstborn went in and slept with her father. He didn't know when she lay down or got up. On the following day, the firstborn said to the younger, "Look, I slept last night with my father. Let's make him drink wine tonight too. And then you go in and sleep with him so that we may keep our family alive through our father." So they had their father drink wine that night too, and the younger got up, slept with him, and he didn't know whether she lay down or got up. So unlike most sibling stories so far in the scriptures, these two actually work together. That's nice. But they're working together to not do right by their father. So it's a collusion, which normally you'd be like, oh, finally, there's some siblings doing something, working together here, which is a major theme in the scriptures is siblings not doing that. But it's for the absolute wrong reasons. So it's even worse. Lot's ignorance, it's not there so that we can think that he's innocent. That Lot has plenty of reason not to be innocent. Bible authors are not trying to protect his reputation. But narratively, it's to portray him as a passive being that has become incapable of action. His self-focused life has led him to this passivity. His constant choosing of the bad has now left him with no choice at all. His repeated attempts to wrestle control over his life from Yahweh has left him without control even over his own body. Verse 36. And so, both of the daughters of Lot conceived by their father. Firstborn, now we find another reason for this story. The firstborn gave birth to a son and named him Moab. He's the father of the Moabites to this day. As for the younger, she also gave birth to a son, named him Ben-Ami. He's the father of the sons of Ammon to this day. Okay, so the Moabites and the Ammonites are numerous people in the days of Moses and the Israelites as they're entering into the promised land. So Moses, the captain of the writing team here, is now giving a correct origin story to these peoples who, by the way, treated the Israelites very badly. Some scholars think that the ancient Moabites and the ancient Ammonites had a version of this story as their origin story, but in their versions, the daughters were heroic for doing this thing. And obviously, in the scriptures, it's reframing that to know this is not heroic, this is a disaster. So Moab, the mother's father is what that means, and Ben-Ami means son of my father. So in Numbers chapter 25, which would have been like real time when the first bits of Genesis would have been written, when Moses and the Israelites were entering into the promised land, the Moabites seduced the Israelites. And so they were excluded from the congregation of the righteous. I mean, it's in the scripture there. You can't be in the congregation of the righteous. Other people can come in, as foreigners and so forth, but not you guys. So according to the Hebrew Bible, does this mean that if you're of Moabite ancestry, you can never turn and follow Yahweh? There were those that believed that. But this is the Bible, and the Bible tends to flip the script constantly and blow our expectations out of the water, because it's very clear. You can't know Moabites, they can't enter. And then you have this book called Ruth. And she's a Moabite and an ancestor of the Messiah. Interesting, isn't it? The mercies of the Lord are unceasing. And he says, even to this day, these are the people. So obviously this is an author writing in the distant future. This is at the very earliest in Moses' own lifetime. So, okay, that's one way to rescue the line, right? Take things and look, we can't, obviously, we're socially disconnected. We're probably not going to get married. We need to have descendants. So we're going to take matters into our own hands and do the worst thing possible. That's one option. Now we're going to see another option to rescue the line. And that is, if it's my line, I better live. So whatever else goes on, I need to make sure I'm protecting myself, even if that exposes other people to death. So this is round 2 of how to rescue the line. See how this works out. Now Avraham journeyed from there toward the land of the Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur, and he lived for a time in Gerar. All right. So there's a couple of theories on when this happened. One is that this incident happens chronologically after Sodom is destroyed, and this is because That's the placement in the order of stories. So it's intuitive, especially for 21st century Westerners and people from the last few hundred years, to think, well, if it's after this in the narrative, then it must be after that chronologically. The other theory, and either theory is possible, the other theory is that the incident is placed as a literary strategy in this spot, but isn't necessarily chronological. This event could have happened years and years before, but this is the right spot to put it because of the literary strategy of the Moses writing team. And I personally, you don't have to agree with this, but I personally think this is far more likely because this doesn't rely, the preceding events with with Lot and his daughters connect with this story in this way for a reason, and also with the next story that we're gonna cover. There's like 3 in a row. So otherwise, you know, Abraham journeyed from there, from where? He wasn't in the cave. He was nowhere near Lot. So you see what I'm saying? It's like this story is like, you know what? The best place to put this story, Holy Spirit inspired story, which is a real event that happened, is not back next to the story of the same type of thing happening in Egypt or wherever it occurred chronologically, but right here as a bookend to these two things. I think that's what's going on. But at any rate, whatever you think, he's going towards the land of the Negev. The Negev is the wilderness. And this is the same phrase that's used before Avram goes to Egypt. So in chapter 12, same thing. He was going towards the Negev. Here, he's going towards the Negev. So you know that he's descending into something here, and it's not a good descent. It's a clue to the authors that this narrative we're about to read is a literary parallel to those events when he went down to Egypt in chapter 12. They're supposed to be held in comparison to each other. They're supposed to contrast with each other because there are some differences too, for the purpose of Torah, for the purpose of instruction. And this place he's going is between Kadesh and Shur. So those two places have meaning to the reader. Kadesh in Moses' time, that's the launching pad into the promised land. Shur is the area that goes towards Egypt. Remember, the Lord rescued Hagar when she was cast out in Genesis 16. She was in Shur. So the idea here is Avram going to go towards the promise, or is he going to go towards Egypt? And here it's looking very much like he's going to head metaphorically towards Egypt and the descent into what he did in Egypt in chapter 12, and rely on his deception, rely on his wits to protect his own life, just like he did then. Gerar, actually, that's a word from the word sojourned. It's related to the word immigrant. Hagar comes from the same word. So it's kind of a word play on he's journeying there. So he's the immigrant. He's the immigrant. Verse 2. And Avraham said of his wife Sarah, you know, she's my sister. So Avimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. He's doing the same thing as he did in chapter 12. This is the same kind of idea. She's going to be his shield so that he's not killed, so that she can be single, so that the leader can take her for himself. He's in a foreign land. This is how he has figured out how to shield himself. Oh, it's just my sister. It's a half-truth, actually. Avimelech is not the guy's name. It's a title, like Pharaoh, means father king. That's why you see Avimelechs throughout the Old Testament, is because it's a title of that type of king. Just like Pharaoh, Avimelech unknowingly, he takes the forbidden fruit offered by Abraham, and he does it through his men. And the reason Abraham employs this deception is to protect himself and protect his line, because he's not going to bear the promised seed, obviously, if he's dead. So he's like, I'm going to protect this promise. I'm going to protect this future, massive descendants that I've been promised by keeping myself alive. But ironically, what the biblical authors are trying to show us is that this is the very thing that puts the line at risk, because it's not just about Abraham, it's about Sarah. And if she becomes pregnant by another man or becomes part of another household, then what happens to his promised seed? Well, apparently in Abraham's mind, it's like, well, I can still, there's other ways, and, it doesn't have to be Sarah, but that's not the way God is looking at it. Verse 3, God came to Avimelech in a dream of the night. First time in Scripture that dreams are mentioned, or that God has ever come to anyone in a dream. First time. Important. And said to him, behold, look, dead. Because of the woman you have taken, she's married. So this is not what happened in Pharaoh's case, but here Elohim directly intervenes to warn Avimelech. Yahweh Elohim prefers to bless the nations through Abraham. That's what he intends to do. But Abraham is clearly not cooperating, is he? So Yahweh is taking matters into his own hands. He still wants human cooperation. So the warning, and that's what this is, it's a warning. It's a recruiting tactic to provoke Avimelech's prayer of intercession. So you're a dead man. He said you're a dead man, or you're dead. So, but Pastor Tim, aren't all of God's promises yes and amen? And he said he was going to die, and then he doesn't die. What's up with that? Is the Bible contradicting itself? This is a very common thing that you'll see multiple times in the Scripture, including in Jonah, including in Genesis chapter 3, where God will make a statement, but it's actually a warning. It's a warning. And this is it's very common in the ancient Near East to speak like this. We're putting our modern Western filter on it, say, well, if you say something's going to happen, it's going to happen. But often, Yahweh, the claim of the biblical authors is that there are times when Yahweh does this as a contingent warning. It's an opportunity. Verse 4, now Avimelech had not come near her, thankfully for him, and he said, Lord, will you kill a nation, even blameless? Did he himself not say to me, she's my sister, and she said he's my brother? In the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands, I've done this. So Avimelech is engaging in intercession, not just for himself, but for his whole nation. It's similar to Abraham's intercession for Sodom. So Yahweh, he's found an intercessor among the Canaanites. Isn't that wild? And Avimelech calls out Abraham's and Sarah's deception and his own innocence in the matter. Shouldn't this be good enough to spare this whole nation? Then Elohim said to him in the dream, yeah, I know, in the integrity of your heart you've done this. I've also kept you from sinning against me. That's why I didn't let you touch her. So again, modern lens, it's, well, if Yahweh Elohim knew that Avimelech was innocent, why did he call him a dead man? It was to provoke him to intercession, turn him from bringing disaster upon himself. Within Yahweh's severe judgment against Avimelech is this divine motive of extravagant mercy. So the warning is to show chesed and mercy to him. Verse 7, now then, return the man's wife, for he's a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, know that you will certainly die, you and all who are yours. So here's Elohim giving Avimelech Torah. He's giving him instruction on how to avoid judgment. This is so wild. Put the forbidden fruit back on the branch, put it back. Recognize that the one who's wearing the snakeskin right now, it's a role, it's not that he's the actual devil, but he's wearing the snakeskin. He's supposed to be a prophet. And what you need, because he's asked for him to ask Abraham to pray for him, what you need is the intercession of the chosen one, the elect one. Because what's the purpose of being chosen? To be a blessing to others, right? And it's through him that life is going to come from me, Yahweh, to you, Avimelech. That's why I picked him. So you just need to help me out here and ask him to pray for you. This is how it's supposed to go. If you fail to do this, then you're just going to bring death on yourself and those around you. So Avimelech got up early in the morning. That's a important phrase we're going to see in a couple of weeks. Early, and that's something that, if you remember, Abraham did when the divine visitors came to him. He got up early in the morning, called all his servants, told all these things in their presence. The people were greatly frightened. You bet. So just put a pin in the phrase, got up early in the morning. And I think in 2 weeks, we're going to revisit that. It's a phrase of testing. Avimelech spreads the words of the Lord. He actually preaches. He's being prophetic. This is what the Lord said. Isn't that wild? He's a pagan Canaanite king. And what they do is they respond with fear. So you're matching this with Lot's fear, but it's different than the kind of fear that paralyzed Lot. It's a fear that leads to wisdom. It's a fear of the Lord. Verse 9. Then Avimelech called Abraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? How have I sinned against..." So, what have you done to us? How have I sinned against you that you have brought on me and my kingdom a great sin, done things with me that ought not have been done? And Avimelech said to Abraham, "What have you encountered that you have done this thing?" 3 questions. Have you seen 3 questions before? Yes, you have. Yes, because you're just excellent Torah readers. You read it. You've read Genesis 130 times, like the biblical authors want you to. And you notice, what is this 3-question thing going on? So in Genesis 3, Yahweh confronted Adam, the human. And he said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree which I commanded you not to eat? And what is this you have done?" 3 questions. In Genesis chapter 4, Yahweh talking to Cain. "Why are you angry? Why is your face gloomy? If you do will your face not be cheerful?" In Genesis chapter 12, this is now not Yahweh speaking, but Pharaoh speaking to Abraham. "What have you done to me? Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she's my sister so that I took her to be my wife?" Now, the key in those 3 instances is not so much the questions themselves, but the response. 3 questions is like this major opportunity to fess up, come clean. And in the case of Adam, he just throws his wife into the bus, right? That's how he's blame shifting is what he's doing. In the case of Cain, he doesn't answer anything at all. In Genesis 12 with Abraham, the text has him silent. So here's another opportunity, come clean. So verse 11, Abraham said, at least he's talking, "Because I thought surely there's no fear of God in this place and they'll kill me because of my wife. Besides, she actually is my sister, the daughter of my father, not the daughter of my mother. And she became my wife, and it came about when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said to her, this is the kindness she'll show me. Everywhere we go, say of me, he's my brother." So is he coming clean? Is he blame shifting? Or is he making rather lame excuses? I think a little bit of everything. There's a little bit of coming clean. He's at least admitting to this. There is some blame shifting. It's God caused me to wander into this land. And there's some excuses. So he's at least moving in the direction of coming clean. And here is where we learn that Sarah is Abraham's half-sister, which the original readers, Israelite readers, I know it's weird and disgusting to us, and it was weird and disgusting to them too. They're reading this, it's in the Torah, this is forbidden. And they're like, "What? Oh, Abraham, wait. This is where we come from? No." Yeah, it's very disorienting. But here we learn that Genesis 12 and this story, we're like, why did it happen twice? That bozo? Why did he do the same dang thing twice? But it's here that we learn that this was just like a policy that he had. So these are 2 instances that are called out. But remember he said, wherever we go, I want you to say this. This sort of thing likely happened many times in their years and years in Canaan. Pretty freaky, huh? So it's recurring deception, recurring oppression against his wife. And this is how he protects himself, not by doing what is right by God and others, but by trusting what seems right in his own eyes. So how's Yahweh going to deal with this? Stay tuned. Not this week. We'll find out soon. Avimelech then took sheep and oxen and male and female servants and gave them to Avraham and returned his wife Sarah to him. And Avimelech said, behold, my land's before you, settle wherever you please. And to Sarah he said, look, I've given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. It's your vindication before all who are with you and before everyone. You are cleared. So it is similar to the gifts, remember in chapter 12, that Pharaoh gave Avraham, gave him all this stuff, but there are some key differences. Again, this is a point of comparison that the biblical authors want us to see the similarities, but also see the differences. Pharaoh's gifts were given while Pharaoh was under deception and Avraham was innocent. In other words, before Pharaoh found out that this whole thing was a farce. Avimelech's gifts occur after the deception is revealed. That's a key difference. Pharaoh gave livestock, automobiles, donkeys, right? Because you ride them and they're mobile on their own. Anyway, and servants. Avimelech gives livestock, servants, land rights, and silver. There's a difference. Through Abraham's mixed confession, it was sort of a confession, there comes a legal claim to the land and redemption. Silver is a symbol of redemption. So in other words, Abraham's partial confession has a reward of not just stuff, but his partial confession leads to some land rights of some kind, even though it's just settling rights. And also, there is a redemptive part of this confession. That's what this is about. So, and note that he calls Avraham your brother to Sarah, even though he knows now that, he's her husband. It's like this juicy bit of irony. He can't help himself. So I gave it to your brother. It's just funny. I think it's funny. Avimelech does not declare Avraham's vindication to him. Notice, he addresses Sarah, which is so weird in the ancient world. Why would the king, who's just been warned by God to have nothing to do with this woman, somebody else's wife, you don't talk to the guy's wife, you talk to the guy. But he turns and addresses Sarah. And he declares that she has now been vindicated, even though she's been, and I use this word trafficked intentionally, because I know this has deep, horrifying connotations to us. But I want you to see this, that what Avraham has been doing repeatedly, apparently, with his wife to protect himself is in the same league in terms of the ancient Israelites reading this. Avimelech, the Gentile king, he's doing for Avraham what Avraham is supposed to be called to do for people like Avimelech. He's blessing him. The pagan is used by Yahweh to model righteousness for the one who's chosen by Yahweh. This is really, this is not like, we don't have to read into this. This is so explicit in the text. We skip over this kind of stuff because it doesn't fit with our paradigm, but the biblical authors don't want us to skip over it. They want us to dwell in this and see who can God use. Verse 17. Well, remember, he said, please pray for me. So Avraham prayed to Elohim, and Elohim healed Avimelech and his wife and his female slaves so that they gave birth. And this is where we learned for the first time the stakes for Avimelech, verse 18. Oh, yes, just so you know, so the Lord had completely closed all the wombs of the household of Avimelech because of Sarah, Avraham's wife. So in response to Avimelech's speech, Avraham fulfills his own role to intercede for the nations. And through that intercession comes healing and the preservation of Avimelech's line. Because Avimelech decides to do right, what Yahweh tells him to do. So did Yahweh judge the nation with a plague of barrenness because Avimelech made an ignorant mistake? Or maybe this had something to do with Sarah being treated unjustly by all parties. More on that in a minute. So the risk to the line has been averted by Yahweh's direct intervention because if Sarah had gotten pregnant or had just been taken into the household of Avimelech, then there would be no conjugal relations with Avraham anymore. There would be no promised seed through Sarah. Avraham's thinking, well, maybe I don't need Sarah. Look, she's beyond childbearing anyway. But that would have ended the promise, wouldn't it? So Yahweh has to directly intervene. And it's also preserved by the repentance of a Gentile king. Avraham now at least starts to come clean. He's not there yet, but he's getting there. And Yahweh's about to make a move, but Avraham's testing is not complete. There's a big, 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 big test to come. So is there another way to rescue the line other than A, taking matters into your own hands and oppressing your father, B, just protecting yourself, even if you have to throw your wife under the bus to do it? Is there a third way? Well, this is where the third story comes in, chapter 21. Then the Lord pakab, and this is another seeing word. It's like he saw or attended to or took note of Sarah, as he had said. And the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. This is a huge twist. We've been waiting for this whole story, starting in Genesis chapter 12, to see how this promise to this 75-year-old man of this many descendants is going to be fulfilled. And now, this is one of the payoffs of all this looking and seeing and what do we see language. We begin to see that the blessing of the promised seed was not exclusively to Abraham at all. It was to Sarah. It did come through Abraham, of course, but it wasn't primarily to him at all. This is Yahweh bringing back his promise and reminding all of us Torah readers of the promise to the woman in the garden that someday her seed would crush the head of the serpent. Sarah is a sinner. Okay, she is deceived. She is oppressed, an immigrant from Egypt. She's laughed at the words of Yahweh and then lied about it. But here, in this verse, we learn that all this time Yahweh's had his hand on her. He loves her. He has compassion for Sarah. And so here we learn that the Abraham story has been more about Sarah than the reader ever knew in God's eyes. I'm sorry. It's a major twist. So Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the appointed time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham named his son who was born to him, the son whom Sarah bore to him, laughter, Yitzhak. And then Abraham circumcised his son Yitzhak when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Yitzhak was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made tzakak for me. Everyone who hears will yitzhak with me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, yet I've given birth to a son in his old age. God did for Sarah what he promised Abraham. The one Abraham put at risk all his life to preserve his promise, right? She was the key to the promise all along. It's tears, and it's also Yitzhak, it's laughter. We aren't just invited to laugh at the fact that a 90-year-old woman's just become a new mom. But we can laugh at ourselves for not seeing this before, because we've been hoodwinked, we've been focused on the dude. he played a part, obviously, a huge part. And there's stuff coming that is his great moment. And obviously, he's the one who cuts the covenant sign. But Yahweh's method of rescuing the lion is to see the one in the background, the oppressed one, the suffering one, the ones that's in the margin, the overlooked one. It's just so unexpected. We can laugh along with Sarah. Okay, I'm not going to read this. Wonderful. You should read it, though. It's wonderful from Walter Brueggemann's commentary. All right, first audience, they're thinking all kinds of things. That obviously Proverbs 14 comes to mind for later Torah readers. That there's a way that seems right to a man, right in his own eyes, but the end of that are the ways of death. So why is this whole section primarily about women? I mean, aren't they supposed to be NPCs? And those of you who aren't in the gaming world, means non-player characters. So kids that play games, it's like they're player characters that are other people at the consoles, and then there's these non-player characters running around that the game generates. And isn't that what women are? Aren't they just NPCs? And in this ancient patriarchal time and culture, the biblical authors, why are they making such a fuss over women at this critical juncture in this history of this redemption narrative? And wait a minute, is the way God sees us the way a man is supposed to see his wife? As Paul would say, this is really, it's about Christ and the church. So what do we do to reflect? Some lessons. If I seek my own benefit all my whole life, I'm going to become a caveman. If I seek first God's kingdom and his way of doing right by God and other people, all that other stuff is going to be added. And in this story, God is no respecter of persons. He's not looking to bless a select few. He's looking for a select few who are willing to spread God's blessing to everyone. And in a normal narrative, this would be a good place to just stop, right? Promised child has been born, the end. End of the story of Abraham. But, the Bible is not a normal narrative. Abraham has a lot to learn. Sarah also has some seriously unresolved ra in her bones. How in the world are they going to come around? And then, wait a minute. Doesn't Abraham already have a son? How's that going to play out? Okay, so we have a few minutes for our round table.
Seems to me that's what Jesus was trying to teach us too. That we need to do what he wants, not what we want. And we tend to go with everybody else and do whatever we shouldn't, or what we chose wrong.
Yeah. True.
So it seems like that Abraham didn't learn anything from the first time that he tried to use Sarah to protect himself. And once again, he was risking the line, and so he learned in the plot twist there that he was risking Sarah, who was also very much a part of the line.
Right.
So, and I'm sure it's going to happen again. As you said, this seemed to be a pattern for him. And so, he just put the whole line at risk.
Yeah.
And that was a really bad thing.
Yeah.
And instead of trusting in God. And so we saw that, a lot of times bad things happened when he didn't do that. And, as you point out many times that, these people are mirrors to us. And, we do the same thing, unfortunately.
It's hard to trust in God sometimes.
It really is.
It's hard. It's hard. Okay, so I guess we have time for a question or two. We've got 5 whole minutes. If there are any questions.
Are the 30 silver pieces offered to Judas linked in any way with Abraham's sign of redemption?
Yeah, great question. I love the way you guys are thinking, where you're making connections across the biblical story. The fact that it is silver, there's definitely a connection. Silver is a symbol in the biblical narrative of redemption. So when silver is connected to redemption, the biblical authors like to point it out. So in that sense, yes. There is another silver episode coming up in the story of Abraham that we're going to see in a few weeks. But there's not a direct connection, I don't think, to what happened here with Avimelech, in the sense that the 30 pieces of silver were guilt money. But the fact that it's silver is definitely significant in the story, yes.
And why did God keep Abimelech from touching Sarah, but allowed Lot's daughters to conceive children from their father?
Yeah, why is that? Why is that? So this is the temptation that I and probably every one of you in this room have, is to try to figure out why X event or Y event happened. And the biblical authors do not seem interested at all in explaining that to us, like hardly ever. It's very rare that a biblical author will spell out God's motives in a particular instance and for letting something happen when he could have otherwise interfered. Very, very few cases, which suggests that they're trying to get at something different. And so what I've tried to wrap my mind around as this questioning kind of individual, like many of you are, is letting go the answers to questions that are not explicit in the text and speculating on my own, because believe me, I'm tempted right now to give you a very long list of speculations. This is the kind of thing that I stay up at night thinking about. But I think it does a disservice to the text to guess. That's what it would be. It would be an educated guess, or maybe not educated guess, but it would be a guess. What the text is trying to say is that here Lot's daughters make a decision to preserve the line by oppressing someone. And that Avimelech becomes the vessel that Yahweh uses to prevent Abraham from making the same mistake. And yeah, why didn't Yahweh intervene with Lot? Well, Yahweh did intervene with Lot in the last chapter, if you recall, in a huge way. And remember, he invited Lot to tell anyone that he considered his to take them out of the city. And Lot declined to be used as a vessel of redemption. 2 sons-in-law, or potential sons-in-law, he made a half-hearted effort where they thought he was joking. So Avimelech was all about it. It's like, yeah, use me. So that might have something to do with it. Again, I wandered into speculation a little bit, but.
Does Lot ever find out what his daughters did to him?
The text doesn't say, but I would suspect, since there were no other guys around, that when they got pregnant and bore children, he probably did. Yeah, that's just me.
Looking ahead, Abraham finally learned to trust God when God ordered him to offer his son Isaac as a sacrifice. If Abraham hadn't used his wife to protect himself multiple times, wouldn't he have been killed and his wife taken away anyway? What other options did he have?
Yeah, I mean, really, what option did he have? That's exactly what he's thinking. I have to protect myself. If I don't, I could die, and the promised son might never come to be. The only other option would be to completely trust God to protect me. And who can trust God? But you see how easy it is to fall into that pattern of thinking? It's like, look, I know that what I'm being asked to do at work is a little sketchy, but I'll lose my job. And I got kids getting ready to go to college, and what am I going to do? Just trust God to take care of it and say no to the boss? Has anyone ever in this world faced a situation like that? So again, Abraham's life is a mirror. It's a mirror where we question, am I willing to do right by God and others, trust the Lord instead of my own feelings on what I have to do to protect me and my own, and let the Lord be my defender? tough, isn't it? Father, we just thank you for this day and this lesson.